Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, co-host. Daniel, nice to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. This weekend there was a phone call made between the president of Taiwan and our president-elect. It got a lot of attention. Yeah. And it was played off as maybe just a routine call of congratulations from the president of Taiwan, but others have suggested that there's more to it than that. Because it's unusual. Isn't it true that it's rarely done, especially with Taiwan, because of the unusual arrangement with Taiwan and China that our administrators, our government has not really dealt in the open, even though we sell them plenty of weapons and we have at least a commitment which is expected, by us that we would always defend Taiwan. But this was unusual for this phone call to take place, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's the highest level call between the two in a number of decades, I think 20-some years, 25 years. And, it was probably sold as just a mutual congratulation, but obviously the symbolism is much greater, much more important than that. Certainly when China, the People's Republic of China sees it, the symbolism is much more important than just a phone call.
Yes, and people are trying to figure out, what it's all about, and there's a little bit of debate on who made the call, but I think that's pretty insignificant. I think it has to be a mutual arrangement, and it usually would occur with the staff. But my guess is it was probably motivated by some people on Trump's staff to make the call, and because I doubt if she would be that aggressive at this point, to be calling. To me, that would be pretty presumptuous. So I don't think that would happen. So they made this call, but why would they want to do this? And I keep thinking about it. Well, my first thought is, Trump's talked a lot about China. In this campaign. He's probably talked about being tough with China as more than he's talked about being a little softer with Russia. So he wants to be tough with China. He's used China to bash and certainly defend his trade policy. So it seems to me like this was more than a diplomatic call. This was a strategic call to probably set the stage or set the record. And sometimes Trump is not bashful about, I'm sending a message, and it might be a message where he is going to be consistent with his tough talk with China, which is not necessarily exactly what we would be looking for. I mean, we want diplomacy, we want conversation, we want people to talk, but if it's designed to emphasize a tough position and send the message that we're in charge, and if you don't do it, that's, I think, a little different story.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there was a piece, I think, in the Washington Times today that talked about how this call was set up. And apparently it was Taiwan-friendly members of the campaign staff, of Trump's campaign staff. And I remember from the Hill, Taiwan is very active in lobbying. They love to give away free trips to Taiwan to staffers. They're very active. And they also really have captured a large part of, especially the neoconservative groups in Washington, D.C. And the Ed Fulner's name, the longtime president of Heritage Foundation, his name was in the article, too, as someone who was very close to Trump, part of the transition team, and very, very much a China hawk. So we might see this as some sort of machinations behind the scene to set the stage.
Somebody had sort of asked the question, if I had happened to been in that position. Matter of fact, they asked me a question like that once in the debates. What would you say if Castro called you? Of course, I was very interested in knowing, why did you call me? But would I have initiated that call under those circumstances? Certainly I wouldn't initiate it to sort of use it to provoke. And I think there's a little provoking here, or setting the standards to show that we're in charge of trade. So I wouldn't do it. And I wouldn't think that it would be the proper thing to do to call at that point. Now, if there was an honest call from an individual like the president of Taiwan or somebody else, and it was considered to be sincere and not motivated by some motive that you wouldn't agree with, no, I don't think that would be good. But I think talking to somebody because I've always argued for diplomacy and all. But I don't think this was promoting better relationships. I think it was maybe promote better relationships with Taiwan, obviously, but also to send a message to China.
Yeah, I was looking back over a statement that you made back in 2004 when it was a bill that the House passed commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act of '79, I believe it was. And you'd mentioned a couple of things. First of all, you found the Taiwan Relations Act as an entangling alliance, and you were, on one hand, you wanted good relations with China, with Taiwan and China, but you felt this went too far, and one of the things was the implicit guarantee of a military protection of Taiwan.
And subsequently, that guarantee has done very well for our military-industrial complex. And right now, I think there's still promises on the table that they will continue to get these weapons. But so far, it doesn't look like China's about to attack Taiwan, but I still think they still have this idea that Taiwan is part of China. So what would our position be? What should our position be on that? Of course, it's not getting entangled in that mess, and an entangling alliance with Taiwan is not a good idea. And my point always has been, by what right does one generation have to make a promise that will come to your aid? And think of how many bilateral and multilateral agreements that we have throughout the world that we will arrive if they need us. I think they're terrible. That's why the alliances generally are very bad. But I think that China, are probably not too happy with this. But I don't think, what can they do about it? They're not going to probably give up all this trade going on. That's why I don't worry too much about the South China Sea, because there's many, many dollars worth of trade going up there, and I think China benefits the most, from the trade, and they haven't. It's admitted, even the people who are complaining about the aggressiveness of China and dredging up these new islands, they've never tried to impede the vessels that are participating in trade.
Well, you remember at the end of the Clinton administration and early Bush before 9/11, a lot of the China hawks in Washington were really pushing the China threat. There were a lot of books being written about it. 9/11 came, that sort of sidelined it. And then the sort of confrontation with Russia came, and that sidelined it. Well, maybe if Trump, as he says, wants better relations with Russia, maybe the China hawks are coming back, to make a push. But, there's a lot of trade implications to this early confrontation with China on the Trump side. And one of the things he did, which we talk about motive even in the title, he had a little Twitter storm after this call, and he was pretty aggressive. And one of the things he pointed out, he was angry about China devaluing its currency to make its products cheaper in the U.S. That was something he's upset about.
I think he has a hard time proving that, because, the yuan for a while there was increasing during all this period of time. Oh, they're devaluing, but we were the reserve currency world, and we kept our currency where we maximized our trade and getting cheap products. And also, I don't think they have that. Right now, the yuan has gone down because they're having some trouble, but that's market forces and all. No, I think that was part of just the badgering that goes on. And this whole thing, to me, makes me leery, because one thing, Trump has received criticism be flip-flopping, say on NATO and different things, but he's been pretty consistent on trade. He doesn't believe in free trade. He believes you should be tough on free trade, and that it should be, not pussyfooting around. You take, for instance, he's taking a lot of credit for saving these 1,000 jobs, in Indiana.
Oh, yeah.
But, that bothers me, because it doesn't have much to do with free trade. Yeah, it'd be great if he could save jobs. And, some people who believe in the free market and these problems, praise them, say, well, part of the deal was they were going to lower taxes. This much, $7 million, the state was going to lower their taxes. So that had nothing to do with that deal. I think that deal was grandstanding. And because United Technology, that owns Carrier, gets a lot of bucks from us.
Yeah.
I mean, and 10% of their business comes from our trade and our military. That what
Government
we've said,
contracts, yeah.
right? So, last year they had a profit of $5 billion and $6 billion came from us, So it's one of those things that I just don't think is the answer. But the one headline that caught my attention on this, that dramatizes how far removed this is from moving toward free markets and free trade rather than protectionism, intimidations, and threats. So here's an article that came out, that I think this came out from the Washington Post. Trump vows to punish firms moving overseas. Well, yeah, it is bad that they're moving overseas. But why are they moving overseas? He has half of that right. Too many regulations, not enough lower taxes. Yes, I think they need better taxation. He should be talking about why this country needs to get the corporate tax down to 15% and not saying, look, you're going to do it because I'm tough. I'm going to punish you. Where does that come from? I'm going to raise the tariffs and do all this. And there's a lot of reasons why business people do move out of this country. And it's not because they hate America. It's because they have certain obligations. Sometimes companies think they have to produce a product at the best price to satisfy their customers. And we've created conditions in this country where all of a sudden it looks to, send them out. So I think this type of talk doesn't work, whether it's tough talk against China or tough talk and threaten them and say that any company, Trump's threat is sort of generalized. Any company that goes out, you're going to hear from me. I mean, this is browbeating at its worst. And governments have too much power. People who believe in this stuff sort of think, well, there's nothing illegitimate about these threats and innuendos about a president. And that is what I don't like, because, when a country does well, if you look at Hong Kong, nobody worried about what was going on there. They had essentially a free trade policy and a free market policy, and things went well. So I think that the more freedom you have, the less intimidation you have, the sounder the currents you have, the less regulations you have, the smaller amount of tax. You don't need to worry about this nonsense of giving the president more power and saying, it's all the Chinese manipulating their currency. And that's the problem, and we got to be tough on them. So I just think that's so far removed from and is misleading for people who should be understanding what free trade and free markets really mean.
And all the punishment in the world is not going to take the place of market forces. These companies do it for a reason, for a market reason. Look at Venezuela, the President Maduro there. He punished firms for raising prices. He punished them for doing this and that and the other. And it hasn't worked. As a matter of fact, it's backfired. In the country, you can't even get enough toilet tissue and all of these things. So punishing, browbeating from the government authorities will not take the place of market forces.
No, that's absolutely right, and that is what they call a command society. You do it our way or else, and we'll punish you. So yes, I think what is being used now with the people that we hear about that may be in administration is they understand the carrot, the stick and the carrot, carrot and stick approach, and the carrot's about this big and the stick is about this big, and I believe the carrot ought to be this big for our companies, and the stick ought to be very, very little or even have one. Just ignore people that are going to do that unless it's a physical thing. But this whole idea that you can manipulate trade, it's like this, and manipulate currencies and blame them for it and think, all we need is a big wall, and this will solve our problems, with our problems here in this country. It's so far removed from what I see as an ideal free society where people make the choices, not politicians who have artificial authority to do things that they shouldn't even be doing. One of the most vicious groups that has this authority, very quiet, not intimidating. They don't talk like Trump talks. And that's our Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
You know, just think, and use of sanctions. You know, our government, you know, the free traders, this is one thing that bugs me. All those free traders in Congress that, you know, Ron Paul, you have to vote for this trade agreement because you believe in free trade. You want to lower tariffs. Yet they're the very first ones that are going to put on sanctions and you know, intimidate. Right now, you know, they're talking about, the Congress is talking about threatening Iran.
Yeah.
You know, after we make a little bit of advancement, they say, we got to be tougher. We got to put sanctions on there. And this comes from those guys that are bragging about the free trade that we're going to get out of these entangling alliances. At least Trump does not push the entangling alliances. He just wants to replace them and be the boss about what they are.
Well, there's just too much incentive for the U.S. and China, how they trade. That doesn't mean we have to be unfriendly to Taiwan, but there's too much at stake with our relationship with China.
And you know what? I think I've always wished that that trade was going on since the Soviet system broke down would neutralize antagonism toward Russia, and that the same thing would happen with China. In a way, I think it is. At least, you know, there's the pretense by the war mongers and the military-industrial complex and all these weapons and missiles being built. The big problem is it might get out of hand. But just think, you know, why in the world do we have to put naval vessels over in the South China Sea because those countries over there fighting over an island? You know, it reminds me of the biggest debate in the 1960 campaign between Kennedy and Nixon was, what would you do if Quemoy-Matsu would be attacked by China? You know, and that was it. And I don't even know if it's 5 square miles that was involved there. So we get carried away. And the answer and the reason, obviously, is government's too big. They have too much power. People should be left alone, and we should live in a freer society, and people ought to reject the use of force individually, as well as our governments ought to give up the issue of using force to try to mold people, to regulate the economy, and to tell other nations how to live. Believe me, if we had more of that, we would have a lot more peace and a lot more prosperity, and we wouldn't be tinkering around the edges here trying to point the finger at the people who should be blamed for so many problems that we have and not looking to ourselves to make sure that we're doing a good job. If we do a good job and protect liberty here and we become prosperous, others will look to us and want to emulate us. That is the way we ought to spread our message. We don't need to threaten and intimidate others to try to do the things that we think they should do. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.